Hey Pat, are you on?
Yes, sir. I'm just getting settled at my laptop. I'll be logged on in just 1 second.
Perfect. I didn't see you. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was trying to get some water and
Ready, Pat, or
Yep, yes, sir.
I think there's an echo there?
Okay, we're all set. Now I'm really ready.
Perfect. I think we can start. Hey everyone, good morning. Welcome to our October meeting. Appreciate you all calling in. I'll have Pat do the roll call.
Okay, good morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. City of Buckeye, Councilmember Clay Goodman. City of Chandler, Mayor Kevin Harkey. City of El Mirage, Vice Mayor Monica Dorsey. Town of Fountain Hills, Councilmember Mike Sharnow.
I am here.
Town of Gilbert, Mayor Bridget Peterson.
I'm here.
City of Glendale, Councilmember Lauren Tolmachoff.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Councilmember Bill Stipp.
I see
Okay,
Bill
thank you.
there.
He's
Okay.
here.
Yes, I see him. Thank you. Maricopa County Supervisor Jack Sellers.
Here.
City of Mesa, Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Here.
City of Peoria, Vice Mayor John Edwards.
Here.
City of Phoenix, Councilmember Laura Pastor.
Mayor Gallego here for Laura Pastor.
Thank you, Mayor. Town of Queen Creek, Councilmember Jeff Brown.
Good morning, all. I'm present.
City of Scottsdale, Mayor David Ortega. City of Surprise, Councilmember Roland Winters. I saw him earlier. City of Tempe, Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. City of Tolleson, Councilmember Adolfo Gomez. Town of Wickenburg, Mayor Rui Pereira.
Present.
And Town of Youngtown, Mayor Michael LaVault.
Yes, good morning, Pat. I'm here.
Great, thank you. Chair, we can proceed.
Perfect. Just a couple ground rules here. If a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment, please type your comment in the box. It will be read out loud, or we will ask for you to ask that question. All meeting attendees just want to make sure you mute your computer, microphone, or phone during this process. So we'll get started with agenda item number 1. Public will be provided with opportunity to address the committee non-agenda items. So we have 3 minutes. Pat, do we have any comment cards?
Yes, Blue Crowley is here today. Mr. Crowley, if you'd like to go over to the microphone, please.
Perfect. Mr. Crowley, you have 3 minutes.
And the meeting that you guys had at the Audit and Finance Committee, it has in their minutes public comment, of which I did, and the extent of which it shows is minimal at best. And since I use this podium for the record, I'd appreciate that in future, when they do those minutes, the public comment and for the record gets on there. In your stuff today, we've got the Federal Government Relations Counseling Services, and you want to increase the amount of money that you're giving them. And I was reading over it, and I found it fascinating that the Trump administration was blamed for a major part of what they had to do and why they needed to get more money. The way I look at it, when it's said about all those cutbacks, was that for the bus, that part of the transit that got cut back, that's the reason for the expansions not having occurred? That's what the feds were cutting back on, or is it mostly Mr. Smith's favorite of the two things, and that would be rail? I did notice that it did mention some of the expenditures that the Congressman Stanton was able to help procure for the Tempe trolley. But you keep on just increasing what you're giving them, but I don't see where you're doing it for the bus. I've got the document there that I turned in last time showing what was supposed to be the expenditures and what you were going to be doing on the different routings to help increase the grid. But then I also know that when it comes to expenditures, what the system does and what it takes care of can be two different things. Back in the day, when I was part of the people writing it with the city of Phoenix, we asked what the industry standard would be for bus stops. And we were told by the consultants there was none. Then when I got a hold of the Scottsdale plan, and it said the industry standard for bus stops is every quarter mile, and it was done by the same consultants. So going with nobody will walk more than a quarter mile to where the bus is, what are you doing about making it that way? And why is the status quo within this organization when it comes to bus stops? You're not giving every single one a shaded shelter insofar as that in the summertime, if you're standing in that direct sunlight for over 10 minutes and the buses aren't running even faster than that, it's injurious to your health.
Chair, he's finished.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Agenda item number 2, Chief Executive Officer's report. I'll pass it over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Councilmember, Mr. Chair, Radia, and welcome everybody. The boardroom still looks awfully vacant, and I'm hoping, as you all are, I hope that someday we can get back together personally, in person, and until then, we'll do the best we can virtually. The first thing I'd like to report on is really a celebration. These are pictures of the Northwest Extension Phase 2. It is rapidly going vertical, as I mentioned before, which is unusual for a light rail project. But you can see there right now, far along on the construction of the elevated station at the former Metro Center, which everyone hopes will someday evolve and transition into a very, very vibrant transit-oriented development. Excited to see that happen in the future. There was a couple, 3 days ago, a press release that came out announcing that announcing that the Federal Transit Administration had finished their work on the full funding grant agreement request of well over $150 million federal participation in this project, and it forwarded on to Congress for a 30-day review. At the end of this 30-day review, if there are no significant issues raised by members of Congress, we will then proceed to the actual grant agreement and the signing of that. And I just wanted to point this out for a couple reasons. Number one, we're so grateful for the work of a lot of people over a lot of years. Mayor Gallego is on the phone or in the meeting today. Mayor Gallego and former Mayor Greg Stanton deserve special credit as they led the efforts for T2050 back in August of 2015. And without T2050, we would not been able to fully fund this because of City of Phoenix stepped up and backfilled a lot of the needs that could not be covered by regional funds. And those other leaders have really pushed this program forward to arrive at this point. Now, next slide. I also, while we're grateful for those leaders, we would not be here, but I also wanted to make sure that we recognize the incredible work of a lot of very dedicated, committed, and talented professionals, both on our staff at Valley Metro and with our consultants. You can see these names, and while this list is certainly not all inclusive, it involves or includes all people who led significant parts of this grant process. This grant process, as I mentioned, is a multi-year effort. It's one of the most stringent and demanding grants that the federal government gives. And there's also included on here, as you can see, not only current Valley Metro employees, but prior leaders. And for example, a good example is Wolf Grote led this effort as head of our capital development for many years. And when Wolf left, Henry Ikwadukwa, our current one, stepped right in and took it across the finish line. And believe me, there were incredible challenges to this project and any project every step of the way until we got to the finish line with the FTA. We're still not there totally, but I wanted you to just be aware that that this is truly, if you want to say it takes a village, a community to make one of these projects happen and get to this point where we have the federal government agree to become our financial partner and invest in this. These are just some of the areas and some of the names of our talented professionals, and I wanted them to be recognized for their good work, because without their work, this project does not happen. And that is true for all of the major projects. So thank you to all these staff members and contractors and consultants and others that work with us to make good things happen as part of the Valley Metro program. And I hope you share my appreciation for them. Another event that happened just a couple short weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, I guess, is the return of front door boarding on all of our buses around the system, both Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix. We have worked closely with our partners in the City of Phoenix to make sure that while we operate under one brand, Valley Metro, we also are consistent in many of our operating procedures, rules, regulations, fares across the region, so that our customers have the same experience, whether they're riding a bus that's run by the City of Phoenix or one that's run by Valley Metro. We worked together and agreed that October 11th would be the day that we return to our front door boarding. And what that means is a couple of things. First of all, it hopefully is a step back to normalcy. I know the path to normalcy has been very, very rocky for all of us. But this is important for us for a couple of reasons. Number one, we went to rear door boarding out of extreme caution and as a protection to our operators. Being able to return to front door boarding not only recognizes advances made in the fight against COVID, but also the completion of the installation of the physical barriers on over 900 buses throughout the region that allow our operators to have both health and safety, but also their physical safety, as it provides a separation. Unfortunately, there are times, thankfully they're not very often, but there are times when our operators are put at physical risk. And being able to install these barriers which protect them in all ways was very, very important for us, and we use this as an opportunity to do that. The second thing is that while we have been entering from the while we've been entering from the rear door, we have not been able to collect most of our fares, since the fare box is in the front door. So we are not only entering through the front door, but we are starting to collect fares through the front door, and we hope that'll help us with our fare revenue. Fare revenue is a combination of being able to collect fares, but also returning riders. Okay, now next slide. And as was asked 2 or 3 months ago, this is our monthly ridership report. A couple of things stick out here. We are providing, as you recall, year over year for the month of September, both for September 19 and September 20. September 19 is, of course, before the pandemic. September 20 is right in the middle of the pandemic. And of course, September 21 is our most recent. A couple of things to see here is, as you can see, we're still down well over 50% across the board in buses and total on our ridership. The ridership has sort of plateaued, but we've right now we're sitting there around 55% down combined ridership, and we have been that for the last 2 or 3 months. The good thing is, if you look at light rail is actually recovering much better than buses are. We are year over year over from 2021. Almost 10% on the bus and light rail combined. Bus is fairly flat, but as you can see, 23%, our riders are starting to return on light rail. We hope this trend continues. The other thing is our ridership on paratransit, even though it's not as significant, that group of riders is certainly important since we are in many ways their only and their most important transportation. And you can see that while we are still down significantly, we're up over 25% or more on both our paratransit and ride choice. So we're getting a lot busier on our demand services. So those are the ridership. Lastly, I'd like to go over just the meeting schedule coming up in November. You can see our next board meeting will be November 18th. TMC, RMC, and Audit and Finance. And at this current time, just for future planning, we are not planning on having a December meeting as we normally don't. If something does come up that requires action, we'll be sure to give you plenty of notice that we would be meeting in December. But for right now, you may want to keep it as a placeholder, but we are not planning on meeting in December. And Mr. Chair, that's my report.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott? Comments? All right, hearing none. We'll move forward with agenda item 3, Audit and Finance Subcommittee update. I'll pass it over to Councilmember Stipp to provide this update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a very productive yet brief meeting. The only items of significance were the internal audit charter review, which there were no recommended changes from our internal auditor, nor did the AFS wish to make any. So as part of our charter, we're required to review it annually, and we are continuing to proceed under those guiding principles. We also had a brief presentation by Tyler Olson on the preliminary service level assumptions going into next fiscal year, following the technical groups meeting as they went forward. We are also anticipating at the end of this month receiving the initial projections from both MAG and ADOT on where we think revenues will be. So we'll start having a little bit more substantial discussion in the months to come. And then we had a brief discussion on the intergovernmental agreements, contract change orders, and amendments that is presented really only to AFS for our information, with the majority of the discussion to occur here at the board meeting. The only thing we've got coming up in the future is a transit life cycle program update, which again helps guide the budget going forward. And we do have a continuing item on the fare recovery update, but since we've just returned to front door boarding, we don't expect to see really any movement on that, perhaps until January. And pending any questions, that ends my update.
Thank you, Councilmember Stipp. Any questions for the Audit and Finance section?
Yes, Chairman Heredia.
Go ahead, Mayor.
So I'm just want to make sure, are there any items that you discussed at AFS that might come forward to the full board for discussion?
I think one of the items that we have that's still outstanding is the advertising on buses that has been kind of lingering for the last few months. We were updated by the CEO that we'd be receiving some information perhaps as late as January, perhaps sooner. We did request that information come sooner. And that is about the only item that we have currently in the queue.
And Councilmember Stiff, if I might add, of course, the TLCP does come before the board for the board's approval and their action, but we review it with the AFS previously before coming before the board. And of course, the entire budget will come before the board as it evolves early next year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We were talking about the advertising when I was last with us. So what's the timeline on that?
We've just recently received updated information from our vendor and different alternatives. The information we presented to the board was simply conceptual, so we've asked them to go back and come up with a formal plan, and we're devising that. We might be ready to come back to the board as early as November with that. We just recently received that detailed plan from our vendor related to how we would do that, implement that on the buses. At the latest, it will come in January. And the reason for that is we don't have a December meeting.
I think November would be wonderful for action.
We'll try to get it ready for you by November.
Mayor, just for your information, we did have that discussion at AFS regarding the sooner rather than later. We did have a discussion regarding all of the advertising potentials that occur here in the Valley as we run into winter months. So we were very encouraging to the Valley Metro staff to get that to us sooner. And I think with this new information, Mr. Smith, hopefully we can actually see that at the November meeting, especially given that we're not having a meeting in December.
We'll push to see that happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward with our consent agenda. Consent agenda is presented for action. Any committee members have any questions or items that they want to separate from the consent agenda? I think we only have two, so hearing none, I request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda and move forward with approval.
So move approve consent agenda, Mayor Dave Ortega.
Second, Lauren from Glendale.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none. Perfect. Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move forward with our regular agenda. Agenda item number 5, federal government relations consulting services, increase in total contract authority for Cardinal infrastructure. So I'll pass it over to CO Scott Smith to introduce.
Thank you,
this
Mr.
item.
Chair. As you can all imagine, the last 3 years have been incredibly eventful in transit and transportation, especially at the federal level. And I am going to turn it over now to our head of government relations and the one who manages our federal relationship, Alexis Tamron Kinsey, who will present this item. So, Alexis.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chair, members, for several years, Valley Metro RPTA and Valley Metro Rail did not retain Washington, D.C.-based lobbyists to represent its interests as a regional transit agency with multiple large projects and other initiatives in development. Knowing that these projects and initiatives would require federal participation, it was in 2017, after consulting with member cities, that the decision was made to secure the services of a federal lobbyist. In August of 2017, a request for proposals was issued after a standard procurement process Cardinal Infrastructure was identified and recommended by a panel of your city staff and Valley Metro staff as the most qualified and the highest ranked firm out of 9 bidders. Cardinal is a woman-owned boutique bipartisan firm specializing in transportation, infrastructure, and economic development policy at the federal level. Cardinal's proposal and services contract provided for a monthly retainer-based agreement for a prospective workload consisting of normal and routine monitoring, tracking, and lobbying activities. And as the memo in your packet sought to highlight, their workload has been anything but normal or routine. It has been materially significant and substantially above the workload and expectations anticipated when the RFP was issued in August of 2017. Since March 2018, at Valley Metro's request, Cardinal's lobbying efforts took on a crisis mode posture and whatever it takes sense of urgency on behalf of our member cities. This included consequential challenges at the local and federal level, as well as having to help mitigate COVID-19 related impacts to our regional transit system. In the face of these serious challenges and critical situations, we instructed Cardinal, specifically Anya Graves and her partner Sherry Little, to increase their level of engagement with the federal government. To keep Valley Metro priorities alive and moving forward, we also asked them to leverage to the fullest their relationships with administration officials, members of Congress, and key congressional committee staff. It's important to note that Ms. Little spent 15 years on Capitol Hill, including 9 years as senior staff to the Senate Banking Committee, which has jurisdiction over transportation and transit matters. She also served previously as the Deputy Administrator and Acting Administrator of the FTA. And most recently, Ms. Graves served as a transportation advisor to the Biden administration's transition team. In direct correlation to the additional work that we expected from them, the region has been a beneficiary of upwards of $1.3 billion in federal discretionary grants and COVID-related rescue and recovery funding that has benefited every member agency that pays for transit service across the region. In addition to another $850 million in formula transit funding allocated to Arizona, which is currently being negotiated in Congress, $500 million of which would be allocated to the Phoenix Mesa UZA. That being said, considering Cardinal's response to the multiple crises we were forced to deal with and the significant amount of additional work they took on in the last 3.5 years, we agreed 2 times to adjust their monthly retainer. In July of 2019, we increased the retainer from $10,000 a month to $13,000 a month. And in January 2021, we increased it to $16,000 a month. Cardinal's rate increase was equitable and justified for the amount of additional work they took on at our request. It also remains below peer agency expenditures for similar services when considering the level of service requested and provided and the overwhelming success achieved by Cardinal during the existing contract. I do want to note that we do have a process we follow when considering equitable adjustments such as these. That process is outlined in our procurement manual to ensure proper procedure was followed, documentation was provided, and budget approval existed. The increases were made within the approved contract totals and the board-approved annual RPTA and VMR budgets. The adjusted monthly amount of $16,000 a month remains within the board-approved budget for fiscal year 22, but if paid through the end of the contract in December of 22, that amount will exceed the original 5-year approved contract authority by $224,000, hence the request before you today. As illustrated during the last 19 months, the federal role in system operations has taken on a greater importance. We anticipate Valley Metro needing this level of federal engagement on an ongoing basis. And with the reductions in fare box revenue, it is critical that federal funding opportunities continue and offer maximum flexibility while we work to recover ridership across the region. At the same time, the region considers extending Prop 400. I had the opportunity to share this information with your city managers earlier this month. There was consensus and agreement that the federal lobbying services will continue to be needed, are valuable to the region, and that Cardinal Infrastructure has done a good job on behalf of the region given the unanticipated circumstances we were faced with. Lastly, I also shared with your city managers and transit staff, because this contract ends in December of 22, We anticipate going out for an RFP for these services again in July or August of 22, which also coincides with the start of the next fiscal year. This will ensure that we do not have any gap in our federal coverage and account for potentially new congressional makeup after the midterms. And as we've done before, your city staff will be asked to participate in the evaluation of those proposals and expectations moving forward. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Alexis. Ask the board members any questions, comments?
This is Vice Mayor Edwards. I did do a chat, but I have a question or just a comment.
I think Councilwoman Tomachov also has a question here. So I'll take I think Councilwoman Tomachov, and then we'll go to Vice Mayor Edwards.
Mr. Chair, it's fine if a council member Edwards goes ahead of me. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. Vice Mayor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a comment. I'm going to be supporting this item to ensure that the organization doesn't lose the vital federal lobbying support in the midst of the negotiations with the federal infrastructure. But that being said, I have to go on record that I'm expressing my deep concern about the path that led us to where we are. When the board authorized the total amount of the contract, it was my expectation that the amount would last for the duration of that contract. Changes to the monthly expenditure resulting in funding ending prior to the term of the contract should have been communicated to the board at the time of the change, and ideally receive approval by the board. Part of our function on the board is to assist Valley Metro to be successful, and we want to help with that success. However, we're also here to ensure that the funding decisions are transparent and exercise a high level of accountability. So like I said, again, I'm reluctantly going to support this item, but please be aware that my expectation is that we have better and more effective communication in the future to avoid a repeat of this type of a situation. And if we don't, it's not going to have my support going forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilwoman Tomachov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with what Councilmember Edwards has already said, but I have some other comments that I'd like to add because when the contract, my concern is a lot of things. Number one concern is where else is this happening within the organization, where contracts are exceeding the authority given by the board. Who authorized this? I have a lot of questions about this, but the biggest thing is that, and thank you for reading the staff report. I had already read it, and I imagine all of us had already read it. So I don't know that that's really necessary to read the staff report to us, but thank you. In July of 2019, it was apparent that the $600,000 was not going to cover the cost of this contract. Yet here we are over 2 years later, and had the contract not been exhausted right now, we still wouldn't be aware of this. So, I mean, that's to me, in my perspective, a violation of trust of the board of directors of this organization. I'm going to support it because I believe I mean, we all understand the importance of federal lobbying, especially now. So I'm going to be supporting this moving forward. But I think that in my opinion, that this is something that probably the whole circumstances surrounding this exact contract, who authorized this, and how does this happen over 2 years ago before we find out about it? And I think that it should go to the Audit and Finance Subcommittee to kind of get to the bottom of this and figure out where else this is happening. And I think that the board itself needs to establish a policy we did in Glendale, that if a contract exceeds its contingency, which generally is 10%, it has to come back to the council. There's no more money to be spent. This is a 37.5% increase with no board authority. It's not 5% or 10%. It's a substantial increase in the contract, and the lack of forthcoming information for over 2 years is, I believe, a violation of trust.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Mr. Chairman, this is Alexis, if I may.
Go ahead, Alexis.
I do want to I believe there was a question from Council Member Arredondo Savage with regard to how do we make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. I do want to note that Valley Metro's new enterprise resource management system, what we call CORE, provides a new functionality that will help the agency ensure that changes in spending on any multi-year contract that may require board authority adjustments are identified and communicated in a timely way. Our old accounting system did not had no automated way of tracking spending against board authorizations. This new system, however, has a mechanism to track annual spending against each board authorization. So Valley Metro will continue tracking the system to include a threshold for the amount of spending anticipated in the board authorization. And should spending on a contract exceed that threshold, the system will alert Valley Metro procurement and finance teams who can work with the responsible division to determine whether the increase is temporary, if it's planned to be recouped later in the contract, or ongoing and will require a contract authority increase. And when contract authority increase is anticipated to be needed early, Valley Metro will notify the board by seeing the adjustment as soon as they can. So we anticipate being able to start entering in those multi-year contracts in the system. And in the months to come, Valley Metro staff will incorporate these thresholds for the approximately 180 multi-year contracts that we have board authorizations on.
Okay. Is that Councilwoman Arredondo Savage? Does that answer your question, or you have additional comments? Question?
I guess it does kind of get me thinking a little bit. I do appreciate that, but I feel like we're putting a lot on this new system. Not only that, this item that we're hearing about the new system, it's another item that we have upcoming that we're hearing about this new system. I mean, maybe it's really time that we have a conversation about what our expectations of this new system, this new technology that we're going to have, and what it's going to be addressing. Because I agree with my colleagues on this one. I don't think we should have ever gone down this pathway. As Councilmember Edwards mentioned, I definitely do have some concerns and want to ensure it doesn't happen again. So maybe understanding a little bit more about what this system and when it's implemented can do, we should definitely have that conversation. But my two thoughts and my concerns. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I see another question from Councilwoman Tomachoff, and then Councilmember Bill Step after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. McKinney said that under the new system, they would be alerted. Obviously, somebody authorized in July of 2019 an increase in spending on this contract, and with simple math would have known at that time that the contract was going to be exhausted before the end of the contract. So, I mean, I'm all for technology and moving things forward, but whoever authorized it understood that we were going to end up here. And then again in January of this year, another increase. The simple math lets you know 2 years ago that we were going to run out of money before this contract was exhausted. So it's the lack of information, I think, that I have a problem with. I mean, even with the system itself cannot authorize the spending. Somebody authorizes the spending. So having a new system is not going to fix that. It's the lack of communication, which was outlined in Councilmember Edwards' comments, is what the issue is. And I'm wondering whether it's lack of a policy. You said if board authority was needed, at what point do you get over? Is it based on individual contracts, or do we even have a policy? Does the board have a policy on when do you have to come back to the board, or does that policy not exist?
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify one thing for Councilmember Tomachoff, and appreciate your comments. It's not readily apparent in 2019 whether we're going to exceed the total contract, because as Alexis alluded to, that increase in the monthly retainer could have been temporary. For example, we could have increased that, and if the situation would have waned, we could have reduced it down below and put certain things off to get back within the total contract amount after that. So while it sends out a warning sign, which I think is what we're talking about, that we've implemented already in our system, that it might exceed it. It all depends on what the activity is. At the time we made this decision, we literally were in the middle of a major fire, and we were making crisis decisions, and we did not know whether this would be, how long that this would last. It ended up lasting and has lasted ever since we had to increase the amount, which is why perhaps the knowledge of the total contract was a little bit delayed. I mean, we probably knew before now, and we certainly knew in January that these things were not going to calm down. But the reason for the new system is to identify to us that, yes, using simple math, that if you continue at the current payment rate, we would exceed. But you need to look at that, because the question is do you anticipate that happening, or is that something that'll self-correct over the next 2 years? And that's what we need. That's what we need to do. And if we, at that time in an analysis, determine that it is a good possibility that it would exceed, then we would be in a position to come back to the board, and we will come back to the board and tell them at that time. The discussion on whether to do it may be the same, but certainly the timing would be different, and there would be a more current analysis of what is going on, as opposed to an after the fact analysis of what's going on.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to respond to that if I could.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Honestly, I've never seen a vendor come back and say, if we're committed to 10,000 a month, that because we did a little extra work, you know, I don't know what was on fire in July of 2019. It was well before COVID, but whatever the issue was in July of 2019, you know, even if the issues are resolved, I highly doubt, it's really highly doubtful that the vendor is going to come back and say, you can just pay us less now. That being said, the question I had was, does a policy exist for exceeding, you know, at what point do you need to, we're already 10% over what the contract was authorized for. That would be $660,000. So what policy, or is there a policy, at what point do we require it to come back to the board, or just whenever, you know, whenever you run out of money?
Well, I think that's a little, council member and Councilor Heredia. First of all, there was a lot going on in 19. Our projects were literally at risk of being canceled in 2019. And it was an extremely stressful time. I was getting phone call from Washington, FTA, and from San Francisco telling us that our projects were in deep danger, including Tempe Streetcar, South Central Extension, and believe me, it was a very significant situation. But to answer your question, as far as that, there are two things that that the board authorizes, or as part of the authorization in a multi-year contract. The first one is the overall contract authority, meaning that you approve X dollars to be spent during the duration of this contract. Because of the nature of our multi-year contracts, the contract flow is not always consistent. Some contracts have a lot of activity one year and not so much activity the next year. And so it's determined how much you spend based on what the activity in the current year is, which gets me to the second control. There's the annual budget, where you budget and approve a budget for the expenditures for that area in that year. And so we budget an amount, and if we anticipate more, we may budget more than what is in the straight amortization, let's say, of a contract, with the anticipation that we may spend more this year but less next year, because not all of our contracts are straight line equal spending. This started out anticipated to be a straight line, but any retainer contract is just that, a retainer. It's not tied to a specific number of hours. It is just a retainer, subject to an upward or downward adjustment depending upon the level of activity you want. And it is very likely that we could have spent that much money to handle that existing crisis, and then basically tell the lobbyists, we don't need you for 3 months, and paid them nothing for 3 months, or negotiated something different that would make up and said, hey, we're authorized overall to pay you this much over 5 years. That's what you signed up for. So we're going to adjust the contract downward, so you will be paid the amount that was authorized by the board. In this particular, and that's what we would normally do. They signed up for the long 5 year, and that we would adjust payments so that they would not exceed that. In this particular case, which was somewhat unique, we went from significant challenges with the projects and trying to save both Tempe Streetcar and South Central in our whole program to the COVID. So it was a very unusual situation that we had one crisis that led to another crisis, and they added upon each other. This doesn't happen often in most any of our multi-year contracts, which cover things a lot like landscaping and other things, which is pretty predictable. This was completely unpredictable, and no one could have foreseen, first of all, both the local backlash and the Washington, that would spill over Washington, of our light rail projects, but also then the COVID, which put everybody at risk, and where we are deeply involved with both our congressional delegation and the FTA in helping to develop the relief package that finally Congress passed. So this is a very, very unique situation. I would be surprised if something like this happens again, but we are setting up a system to ensure that we can at least identify a potential for excess, and we can analyze it. And if we need to, we can come back to the board. We're going to do our best to make sure that you are notified as early as possible that there is a potential for a total contract authority to be exceeded, and that would be on a case-by-case basis.
Mr. Chair, I would say, thank you, Mr. Smith, for that. I still believe that there needs to be a stated policy for the organization for when that needs to occur, because otherwise it's left willy-nilly up to whoever's managing the contracts, what they think how it should move forward. So I don't see any harm in coming up with some sort of a policy that says at this point of spending, because I did look in the budget for this expenditure and it's not identified. It's just contracts. So this specific contract, I couldn't find anywhere where it was identified. So that could be any number of contracts. And my biggest concern is I don't know, and none of us know where else this may be happening. And these are public funds. I mean, we have to be absolutely clear and upfront and as transparent as possible about what we're doing with these public funds. So I would say, I mean, this, today's not the day to debate to debate a policy, but I would say the idea of how this happened and what we can do to fix it, I would say send it back to the Audit and Finance Subcommittee. I'm going to be supporting, moving this contract forward or this extension forward. But I think that we need to make sure that we have a policy in place, because these are really big contracts and this is public money. And, I feel like we need to do everything we can to protect and be as transparent as possible. Without a policy in place, and as Mr. Smith said, on a case-by-case basis, I don't know how we could assure the public that we're doing that.
Councilmember, thank you, Councilmember Tomoff. And I think one thing that in Alexis, in explaining our program, didn't go the whole way. And I agree with you on the policy. I have no problem with that. And I think that what it would be is what we would propose, while the system gives us the information, we would also propose that there would be a monthly notification, monthly or quarterly, whatever the board would like, that we would actually formally notify the board of those contracts that have been identified for the system as possibly exceeding their contract authority. And then board members could ask, or we could give a presentation if we think it's significant, or even if we think that we'll fall in line over the term of the contract. At least it is identified and reported to the board as a contract that possibly over the term of the contract could exceed its overall approval. And this would, of course, be for any of those contracts that we have on a recurring basis. And we would formally notify the board, just like we do on travel and just like we do on procurement RFPs that are out there, so that you have an idea in your packet every month if there is a contract or contracts that might be at risk, and therefore you could ask questions, or we could present and we could discuss whether we need board action or whether we think that this will come into line and won't require any additional authorizations.
Perfect. I think Mr. Councilmember Stipp had additional comments as well, or?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I 100% agree with everything that my counter board members have talked about. This is not a technological problem. Humans were involved in this process from the very beginning, and to infer that, well, because we don't have the right technology in place, we got to this point, I think that's disingenuous. I also believe that the comments that Councilmember Tommelchoff made about AFS looking at this from an auditing perspective are right on target. And I will like to assure the rest of the board that that will be an item that will come to the AFS at our November meeting to get that looked at. Ongoing contracts is one of the things that we normally look at, and this is going to be something that I think we owe the board and the public a look at the processes that allowed us to get to this point, so that we head this off in the pass. We head it off at the pass long before we get to any technological decision points. Final comment, though. In listening to the argument about why we need to expand this, and I don't want to start the bus versus rail thing, but if all of the issues that were being protected by the lobbyists were done to save rail, why is RPTA funding any of this extension? I think to Mr. Crowley's point earlier, we owe the bus system some level of protection. And if we were fighting for South Central and the Northwest Extension rail projects, that all of that money went to rail and none of that money went to bus, or a very small portion of it. I should probably say it that way. I'm not going to argue that point on this. I'm going to vote in support of getting this contract moved forward, but I think we owe ourselves a strong look at how this money is being spent in the future and what we are really lobbying for, RPTA versus VMR, and make some difficult decisions going forward.
Councilmember Reddy, if I could maybe clarify something, and thank you, Councilmember Stipp. As we discussed, as Alexis reported, is in your report, yes, in 2019, it was primarily, or 18 and 19, it was primarily rail. However, the COVID, which we were deeply involved in, including there were many times when 3-4 times a week, we would be in consultation with our delegation who was requesting specific guidance on the COVID relief funds that were earmarked for transit, the majority of which went to bus. We had over $500 million come into this region to support transit, and a large percentage of that went to RPTA and went to bus. Those were the efforts that went on the federal level from the beginning of COVID on. It's been almost exclusively, or nearly all of it, except for Northwest 2, bus related. These activities ebb and flow depending on the issue before us. Overall, for example, we are right now lobbying on the surface transportation extension. Those are formula funds that represent bus. Those are how we buy our buses. Those are how we pay for maintenance. Those are things that specifically relate to bus operations, not rail operations. There are capital funds that are involved, so there is some crossover there. But I just want to make everyone make something very clear that while often we have to scramble because the fire happens to be the bus system or the rail project, that we went on this case from one fire to a wildfire, which was COVID, which had a much broader impact on our system and therefore required heavy duty lobbying and involvement in the funding that backfilled our RPTA budget, which each of your cities received allocations for, and in the tune of literally hundreds of millions of dollars that came into this region, and everybody benefited from that. So just I think it's worthy of a conversation. So people feel comfortable and understand that. But I didn't want to leave it's sitting there that the assertion may be that we only lobby for rail and not for bus.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead,
Mr. Smith, are you saying that the COVID relief money was not based on formula, that it was based on our lobbying efforts?
The actual disposition of COVID money was based on formula that came out of Washington. How much money went in and the definition of how that money could be used and putting more money for transit in general was very much a part of the bill. Our congressional delegation in helping to formulate that bill and congressional staff who on the committees that were writing those bills utilized us and our lobbyists extensively in trying to understand what they would be arguing for and presenting it in Congress as the bills were written up. That is where our efforts came. Once the bills were decided and they said we're going to put, for example, $1.3 billion additional to this level of transit, then the disposition of those funds is formula driven. But the definition of how much money and what it gets spent on, that was all done as part of congressional negotiation. And that was all part of that. And we were actively involved in that, as I've said, almost on a daily basis with our lobbyists working the congressional committees where the bills are actually written. And we know the congressional committee staff very well. And also with our representatives whose staff would call us and our lobbyists to try and understand and ask us, what is the priority I should put in the bill? We're very fortunate that we have Representative Greg Stanton, who's on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and is very influential in including transit items. And Senator Sinema is on the Senate Banking Committee, which handles transit funding on the Senate side. So we work very closely with their staff when they would call and say, hey, here's a proposal. What do you think of it? What should we add that's specific to Valley Metro, to the Valley? And that's where our lobbying efforts come in. And as I've said, after that bill is written, then the distribution of the funds is formula driven, but not the definition of what the funds are, where they can go, or how much is involved.
Okay.
I'm good, thanks.
Is there any other comments, questions on this item? And I think just to recap this item, agenda item 5, voting on the federal government relations consulting services increase the total contract authority. I think we're voting on that piece today, but I think per the comments, I want to just reiterate to Valley Metro staff, Mr. Smith and Alexis, if we can figure out a policy or some process, right? I think the process of how I got to this point is something that we can look at, and I highly suggest maybe through the AFS we can look at like developing this type of policy or process to make sure we understand the technology that's being implemented that will help us, but there has to be something written to these items that shouldn't get to this point. So is that fair?
Yes,
Yeah,
Mr.
Councilman
Chairman.
Reddy, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we appreciate that. And we'll come up with a policy which will be along the lines of what we've discussed today. And we'll welcome that. We'll welcome the comments, but I think we can come up with something that will satisfy the board's rightful need and desire to be informed as soon as possible if these situations come up. And we'll come up with something that I think we'll work with the staff also to come up with something that we can present to AFS that will resolve this issue.
Perfect.
Going forward.
Perfect. So I ask request a motion and a second to forward this for authorization.
I move that we forward this for authorization and include the recommendation as approved by Management Committee for staff and the Audit and Finance Committee to develop proposed process change for the Management Committee, AFS, and Board for future consideration so that contracts above the Board's approval threshold cost change orders must get Board approval within a reasonable time when a cost or change order is proposed or requested.
Second, Mayor Ortega.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego, Mayor Ortega. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion passes. Next item, number 6, travel expenditures solicitations. So I am aware there's no information on this item. Scott or
No, Mr. Chair, unless there are questions.
any questions from board members? All right. Item number 7, future agenda items. If anyone has any agenda items they would like to ask to include in future meetings. Hearing none, next meeting is Thursday, November 18, 11:15. This concludes the agenda items for today's joint meeting. If there's no other further discussion, this meeting is adjourned. And we'll move on straight to our next meeting. Item number 1, public comment. Public will have this opportunity. Pat, do we have a speaker?
Yes, sir, Mr. Crowley.
Mr. Crowley, you have 3 minutes.
He's making his way to the podium.
Okay.
The agenda item I'll be covering in a broad sense is the one on the service changes. But I'll start with the document from 06. On here, it has funding sources for transit, and it's a total of $8.6 billion in 2006 monies. And it's got federal funds, Prop 400, local funds, fare box. And I'd like to know what that pie chart looks like now, since what was stated is that we lost $2 billion between 9 and 12. Well, show me that those cutbacks for the funding sources, and show, because till today, I want to know how much you've got in. And then I also noticed that it has the uses, and it's got bus operation, 2.8 billion, Phoenix Public Transit, 905 million, bus capital, 1.7 billion, and light rail capital, 3.2 billion. I'd like to see what those figures are, since you've got the monies and what you've done with them. And I also would like to know who pays for rail operations, because I noticed we've got bus operations there, big chunk of change, and light rail capital. But who, what, where, and why do we pay light rail? How is that done? And where is that money? Since if it's a 60-40 and the amount is that it's costing more to build and do that than you've given us for the bus, what can I say? With the document I turned in, Mr. Smith was instructed to get the supplemental document put together showing what it is, all the routes that got taken away, how were they substituted? What is the timeline? You know, I understand that there isn't that much institutional memory within this organization, in that other than Pat and myself, who's been here? Well, I know that Mr. Smith came on board with the stuff that they did after '09, but with what you did, where is the new document? And I also would like to point out that when it shows the light rail, that it didn't go into Metro Center, or what I thought was Metro Center. And when I asked why, I was told that Metro Center is a concept, and that's why it only went to the one side of the freeway. Well, it's more than a concept. Thank goodness that we are getting it over that part of the freeway. But I also look at all that map and say, if you keep on doing that and you got the money to spend, where are those bus projects that, oh, you don't have any? You need to be expanding. We need the grid made, and you need to do your job.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. We'll move forward on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda is presented for action. Want to ask that any board member want to remove any item on the consent agenda. We have 2 items. Hearing none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Move, Chair. This is Robin.
Second, it's Lauren.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move forward with our regular agenda, item number 3, proposed April 2022 service changes. So I'll pass it over again to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is on the agenda primarily so we can begin public outreach. We weren't planning on having a formal presentation unless the board would like to have a presentation. The changes are important but somewhat limited. But if we're not asking you to approve these for April, simply to enable us to go out for formal public hearings on these. These will be coming back to the board in a few months after we've received the public comments for final action, Mr. Chair. So unless there's other questions, we won't have any presentation, but we're ready to answer any questions you might have.
Perfect. Any board member have any questions or comments on the proposed service changes?
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I do.
Go ahead, council member.
Well, it's the follow-up from last month's board meeting, the questions that Mr. Crowley asked, and even the comments from today. Can we get and it's related to service changes, which is why I'm tackling it here. Can we get that comparison of what was proposed in the plan to what we actually have done? Can we get that sooner rather than later as we go through this process? Because Mr. Crowley keeps referring to the document from 06, and we have a service plan today, and many of us have no idea what he's talking about. And I think it's important that we understand that when we start talking about service changes. And I think we all understand why we're in the situation that we're in because of the funding in the Valley. I don't think there's any dispute on that. I'd just like to know the background to that. I don't think that's unreasonable. Is my first question. Is that possible?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Stipp, as not only possible, we want you to know the background. Mr. Crowley did point something out, and that is institutional knowledge. And this happened 12 years ago, the rebalancing 12 and 11 years ago. And we are digging through our files to try and reconstruct as best as we can the process that happened, that took the plan that was originally approved in 2004, 17 years ago, was updated in 2006, 15 years ago, and then with the Great Recession was completely, had to be completely, basically almost thrown out and rebuilt in 2009 and 10. Tyler Olson and his group, working with Joe Gregory and their group, are pulling up the documentation as best they can, and actually reaching out to some of your cities, because there are some staff who were around then, to pull together as best we can a narrative and a history to show how we moved from one to the next. And basically, since that 2009 and 10 rebalancing, because of our revenue, we have not made any we've certainly not made major changes in philosophy as to where service is. There have been tweaks to individual routes, but we are working on that, and we hope to get that as quickly as we can. We're also working with MAG because they have more institutional knowledge than we do. So we're in process of doing that, and we will get that to you as absolutely soon as we can, because I think that'd be a great discussion to have for everyone to really understand. And as somebody who was part of that rebalancing 11 years ago, I would love it if everyone could get that history, because it is very important to recognize where we came from to understand why we're where we are today.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's question one. And the second question that came up last month that is kind of related to this item is, and I'm going to quote from the minutes. Mr. Crowley said, "I see where you're putting money such as in the Tempe trolley and saying that it's bus." I think we need to get a better understanding of that, and we need a public clarification on whether bus money went into the Tempe streetcar or not, if that's a light rail project, and if so, how. I think that was a comment that was made that either needs to be clarified or completely, proven false. That's too big of a comment to leave hanging out there for another month when we're talking about providing services to the Valley. And that is all the questions and comments I have.
Thank you, Councilmember. Scott? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember, for bringing that up. And I can say unequivocally that we are precluded by statute from taking regional funds that are that we receive out of Prop 400 and using any funds. There's a firewall between bus and rail. We are precluded legally from moving any monies out of rail into bus and bus into rail, vice versa. Also, we can use no regional funds for any rail operations. Those must be funded from other sources other than Prop 400. And in our policy, they're funded by the cities of Phoenix, Tempe, and Mesa, 100% completely, unless there are other sources other than Prop 400 funds that we could utilize for those. There are some federal funds that might be available, but they have nothing to do with Prop 400. But I can say unequivocally that the statutes do not allow us to mix and match monies at the Valley Metro or the regional level between the two modes. The monies that are bus remain bus, and the monies that are rail remain rail. And I think that those of you in the West Valley are very familiar with this, because when Glendale exited the rail program, there was a lot of consternation, and understandably so, about the monies that had been allocated to, for example, the city of Glendale for their rail program, and they could not be repurposed for any other effort other than to stay in the rail program. That was on the other side was a very stark reminder of as to what the statutes, the enabling statute of Prop 400 requires. And the same thing happens throughout the valley. That just happens to be our most recent example of where you could not mix funds between one and the other.
So clearly that information was derived from something that he's reading. So I think we should look at what we've got out there and figure out where that came from.
Well, Council Member, if Mr. Crowley can show us that, we'll be more than happy to find out. If there's any information that's confusing or that's incorrect, we will clarify it or correct it.
And I think that would be helpful for the staff that's in the boardroom there with Mr. Crowley to facilitate that today if we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Future agenda items, requests, report on current events. Any board member like to add an agenda item or expression of that?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask this question or not, but
Sure.
this is with your surprise. I understand the ALC is going away on the right choice system. Can you tell me what the background is on that, or why it's leaving?
Councilmember Heredia, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Roland Winters. Basically, they're leaving the business. They're making a business decision to leave, and what I can do to give you the details, because while I've been briefed on it, I can't remember it right off the top of my head of all the different reasons. I would be very, very happy to have Jim Hilliard and Tom Young follow up with you to give you the specifics. But basically, it's not something we're doing. They are making a business decision, as we found some of our, especially in this COVID-related, businesses are re-evaluating where they want to be and what they want to do, and that's one of the big challenges that we have. And we do have a procurement that's going to go out on the street very in the very near future. We'll be presenting to the board in the next few months to renew our paratransit and ride choice program, and we will be making some adjustments to try and cover some of the challenges we've had. But if it's okay with you, Councilmember Winters, I will have Tom and Jim follow up with you to give you the details of that.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you. Next meeting, again, Thursday, November 18th, 11:15. So thank you, everybody. This concludes the agenda items for today's RPTA meeting. If there's no other further questions, this meeting is adjourned, and forward to the next. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
You do.
I remember, Pat, do we take roll call again on VMR?
No, I have everyone accounted
Yeah,
for
everybody.
VMR. Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you. We can start whenever you're ready.
We can start. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll start with Valley Metro Rail meeting. First item is public comment. Pat, assuming we have Mr. Crowley.
Yes, sir, Mr. Crowley is ready. Go ahead.
You have 3
All
minutes.
right. The documentation about the rail, well, you heard him say that the bus is the bus and the rail is the rail. What is the trolley? Is it a bus or is it a rail? Well, the original funding sources, they were using bus funds. And I see it as a rail project. And why Mr. Smith couldn't express that is beyond me. With the rail itself, I look at places like 16th Street and go, well, there's a major bus route that runs there and it crosses the rail. Are we multimodal? No, there still is not a stop there. With your continued construction of the line, are you making it so that along it, when you have bus routes crossing, that you have a stop? But are we doing anything multimodal? The central station is being leveled. Why? What was it? Because it was multimodal? No, because we're moving the rail down the street here. Why doesn't the rail work with the bus? Because the rail considers itself only. When I see the monies that are going, like I said, who's paying for operations? I didn't see that listed there in expenditures. What are the operations cost? And like I said, who's paying it? And if possible, could the chair instruct the staff to get that information to me, please? With the rail and what it has done, like you said, there's no expansion at the moment into Glendale. But as I stated, when it was originally being shown, and I saw that the rail only was on the east side of the freeway, I said, isn't this supposed to be going to the bus center there at Metro? That would have made it multimodal. And they said, and this is a quote from MAG, that Metro Center is not a place, it's a concept. Well, my concept is that's pretty inefficient and not done right. When you did cross the freeway, why is it that you had to go above ground? Why not do a tunnel just like the bike route that's right there? And you could have gone straight over to the bus terminal. But no, that's going to be eliminated. Why aren't you doing things so that the system is working together? Thank you.
All right, perfect. If I'll just suggest that if Metro staff that is there can maybe talk to Mr. Crowley to get some details on what he's looking for. So
We will do that, Mr. Chair.
perfect. We'll move forward on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda is presented for action. Any committee board members have any questions or comments? 2 items here. If none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Move, Chair.
Councilwoman Arredondo Savage, move.
Second.
Second, Mayor Gallego, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move forward to our regular agenda. Item number 3, summary of Valley Metro Small Business and Disadvantaged Business Enterprises effort. I'll let Mr. Scott Smith to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is primarily an issue that was brought up by Mayor Gallego several months ago. And as we walked through and had discussion with staff, it's a very, very broad issue and can cover a lot of area. We've tried our best to identify areas that we can provide information that would be most important or of interest to you on the board. We've received recently some additional clarification, some questions. I'm not going to say we're going to be perfect in our presentation, Mayor, but we're trying to cover as much and hit the points that we think between talking with your staff and others that are relevant and salient to this discussion. But if we don't, please feel free to ask and we'll fill in as best we can. So I'm going to turn it over now to Patty Clark, who's the director of our procurement, chief procurement officer, and Patty will give the presentation. Patty?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Mr. Chair and council members, for the opportunity to give an overview of the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. So we could go to the first slide, please. Thank you. As the designated recipient of the U.S. Department of Transportation funds, the City of Phoenix has established the DBE program for the region. The objective of the program is to ensure that disadvantaged business enterprise have equal opportunities to participate in federally funded contracts administered by the City of Phoenix and its subrecipients. The program is achieved by creating level playing fields across for all participants. It promotes the use of DBE firms. The program helps remove barriers and assist firms that can compete successfully in the marketplace outside of a DBE program. And lastly, the program ensures non-discrimination in award and in contract administration, making sure that we follow all race and gender neutral measures as regulated by the FTA. These measures include aspirational goals, training, outreach, and technical assistance. In October 2020, the City of Phoenix established their new triennial goal at 8.2%. It's important to note that Valley Metro has active contracts that date back to 2013. And at that time, the triennial goal was set at 3.2%. And additionally, we have active contracts that span over the past 2 triennial goal sets by the City of Phoenix, meaning the previous goals from October 2014 were set at 4.9%. And in 2017, the goal was at 5.98%. Can I have the next slide, please? As the subrecipient of federal funds, Valley Metro has adopted a process. Our process includes in the development of federally funded procurements. Valley Metro submits the solicitation documents prior to issuance to the City of Phoenix. The solicitation documents are then reviewed by the City of Phoenix and then returned with the appropriate DBE requirements that must be included in our solicitation. Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix conduct together a pre-offer conference to discuss in great details the mandatory DBE requirements for federally funded procurements. We also discuss to the participants of the conference of how to discover DBE firms. After the solicitation process closes, the proposals are then reviewed for responsiveness to the DBE requirements. When there is an identified successful bidder, Valley Metro works closely with our designated City of Phoenix Equal Opportunity Specialist for concurrence that all DBE requirements were met. This means, did the successful bidder submit all the required documentation? And did the proposer submit and identify outreach efforts for DBE contractors? And are we in receipt of the small business utilization commitment? It's important that this form here captures the total participation commitment. So if all the requirements are met, the City of Phoenix issues Valley Metro a formal letter of concurrence that all of the DBE requirements were met. So once a contract's been executed and we move forward to issue a notice to proceed, Valley Metro conducts a kickoff meeting to once again go over the DBE requirements and provide training to the prime contractors. And then throughout the contract, the duration of the contract, Valley Metro monitors the contract and the contractor's performance in the system of record through the City of Phoenix, and that is B2G Now. So on the right side of your slide, you can see that Valley Metro's DBE summary results. So Valley Metro currently to date has 50 contracts with DBE commitments. Our prime contractors have made the commitment of an estimated total value for our DBEs a little over $47 million, and the prime spend to date is just at $53 million. So therefore exceeding their proposed DBE commitment by $5.7 million. I have the next slide. So best practices and outreaches. So Valley Metro has a DBE outreach administrator, Gary Flournoy. Gary has professional and personal relationships with over 23 public and private organizations, and he's also the president of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, also known as COMPTO. His rapport with these organizations allows him to connect contractors to DBE contractors. Gary also provides resource tools such as the official database containing the eligible DBE firms certified by the Arizona Unified Certification Program to ensure that our primes are aware of the potential DBE firms out there. Valley Metro also disperses our sourcing events by utilizing email blasts through our e-procurement system, multiple websites, and also legal notices in the local paper. Moving to the ongoing outreaches, I would like to now turn the presentation to our Director of Capital Development, to further discuss our enhanced outreach efforts. Henry?
Thank you, Pat, Mr. Chair, and board members. Thank you for having me. When I came on board in February, one of the things that I asked staff to look at was how we administer and monitor the DBE program. And based on what I received from them, we developed a program where we will be involved in serious outreach. As of this time, the region has two major opportunities for prime contractors and consultants to reach out to DBE. One is the Arizona Transit community where ADOT, I believe, they have a DBE program where people come together, prime consultants and contractors. That happens on a yearly basis. It's on the calendar. We reach out to all our consultants, primes, and DBEs to participate in that program, making sure that we engender that personal relationship, which is basically the basis of where these kind of connections can be made. So we participate in that and reach out to our consultants to also do so. The other one is what the City of Phoenix does. City of Phoenix Aviation and Streets also conduct programs, events that bring primes and DBE firms together, and we participate in that. So I asked the question, maybe going forward, Valley Metro will also have something on the calendar that will be more focused to Valley Metro. And we're working on having that as well on the calendar. The other thing that I'm doing is also helping, talking to each of the firms that work for the Valley Metro to make sure that the commitments that they made, they're going through with it. I am beginning to have regular meetings with each of the primes that work on contracts for Valley Metro to make sure that the commitments that they made, in cases where they can go over what those commitments are, that they do so. I was told, rightly, that we can only encourage and use our influence to make them do more. We cannot really enforce. So we doing all of that with every single firm contracts that we have. I'm meeting with all the primes to look at what they are doing with our DBE program. So that's my presentation, and I'll take any question.
Okay, anything else, Mr. Smith?
No, we'll answer any questions now. I'm sure Mayor Gallego probably has some questions or inquiries or things. And so, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you, but I'm assuming you'll have some follow-up questions that we'll do the best to answer.
I do. And I had originally hoped to have a motion, but once again, this was not listed for action. So in the future, when I request an item, I'd always welcome the opportunity to take action. So I'll start with a fun question. Mr. Smith, what's one of your favorite Valley Metro investments that has really helped a small business in the Valley thrive?
Well, I'm especially proud for a lot of reasons of our South Central extension. Although it is because it's been a mix of both challenges to our small business community, but an example where we can reach out and make the community part of our projects. Before this even started, we told the contractors, and we actually met with the contractors in the community to say that DBE was not the end; it was merely the beginning of what our outreach process would be. While we're never perfect, I'm proud of what we've been able to do to create not just our mantra was we're not creating jobs, we want to create careers. One good example is what we did on the artwork. We found that many of our artists that participate in our art outreach are actually people that aren't even from the Valley, because apparently there's an industry where people.
But I was looking for a success story of a Valley company, Mr. Smith.
Oh, Valley company?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm telling I don't know the Valley companies. I don't track it by that, but I can tell you we have several artists, individuals that we've made careers out of that had no intention of bidding on the artwork. And what we did is we not only brought them in, but we taught them how to apply for comparable jobs. And I know I can't tell you by name because it's been a while, but we have at least 2 or 3 artists, South Phoenix-based artists who had never applied for a public art project. We got them involved in our art work. They were awarded contracts. Not only that, they've gone on to apply and been successful on other projects. I don't have off the top of my head a list of actual companies. We track things on an overall basis, but that to me is one of my proudest, is where we've created careers. For example, some of those artists, and that was primarily through the impact or the effort we had to expand our outreach to the local community.
Wonderful. If you were to talk about what % of Valley Metro spending goes to our small business partners, what % is it now?
Our small business or our DBE? Because
let's start with DBE.
You know what? We were over those numbers. I'm sorry, Mayor, I don't have that off the top of my head. I can get those numbers to you very quickly because I know that we went over those over the last week as we were looking at this, and we do review those with our contractor Kiewit every month. I just don't have those on the top of my head.
If I said we had a target of 47 million out of 2.4 billion, does that seem feasible?
I think what in the presentation, what you said, if 47 million might have been the target for the DBE. I'm not doing the math right in front of me. Those were numbers that Patty put forth in her presentation.
Okay, so to me, it comes out to less than 2%, close to 2%. And so one of the things I would love to see us discuss is that the number we want to be at, or could we afford to be more ambitious?
And if I could, let me follow up with you on that specific, because I know there other numbers that we get as far as outreach with Kiewit and things. And I can follow up with you specifically on that project to get you some more detailed numbers that are more broad-based than what we showed you in that presentation right there, which was more general in nature.
Perfect. Do we track the number of veteran-owned businesses that partner with the city of Phoenix? I mean, with this Valley Metro?
I'm not sure. I'm not aware that we do track the number of veteran. That is not something that the federal government asks, and we primarily follow the formula that working with your DBE office ensures that we first of all are in compliance with federal, but I am not aware that we specifically do track that.
Wonderful, but our new software might allow us to do so.
I believe it would, and we can also, Patty, I guess I should have deferred to you on a lot of these, Patty. You're more in tune with the day-to-day operations, so if you have an answer that's better than mine, then I would defer to you on this.
Yes, sir. So, Mayor, we currently do not track the veteran spend, but within our new current system, the vendors can build out that profile, and that is one of those that they can select.
Wonderful. I have several more questions, but Councilwoman Arredondo Savage, who is so knowledgeable on these issues, just looked up, and I thought I might pause for a second, and then I'll come back to my questions.
Oh, I first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Mayor Gallego, because I learned a lot from this presentation. I wasn't as familiar with this program and some of the things that we were doing, so I am super grateful. I went through all the background material, and I know there was some additional information. But one of the things I think, Mayor, that you mentioned, and I'm still kind of a little confused, is the evolution. And I think, Patty, you tried to do your best to explain it, and I apologize if I didn't quite catch it, is the evolution from 3.2% to 8.2%, but really what that looks like in a bigger picture. It's really hard to figure out when you talk about 50 contracts, out of how many contracts. It just didn't really seem to be put into context for me. So I would really love a little bit more additional information. That would be super helpful. And exactly where we intended to be, I'm thinking like at 41 million, but we ended up at 47 million. And then put that into context too, because I feel like, I think that this is what where Mayor Gallego is going, is thinking, well, you know, it's great to be a status quo and to meet where we need to be federally. But I think we all want to exceed and do better and attain our goals to the best of our ability, and see if those are still appropriate at the time. And of course, I love the idea of looking for veteran-owned business owners. I think that is something I would 100% get behind. I think, Patty, you probably already know this, or somebody, because the Small Business Administration, they have an awesome website that actually has a list of all the veteran-owned businesses. So you can contact James Piper, and he is super knowledgeable. And that just may be something really easy for us to do and to implement. I would 100% say that we do that. And I would also ask too, is how can the cities be more engaged? How can we work together and collaborate and to ensure that even some of maybe our local businesses throughout the state also have the ability to engage in maybe offering different contracts. And I know too, Patty, you mentioned something about eliminating barriers. And of course that just asks more questions to me when I get some information. So I apologize for that. Is what does that look like in regards to some of the education that is out there that you talked about for the ones that are actually submitting for a contract? But what about those businesses that are out there but that don't know how to do it? You know, how are we reaching them? How are we encouraging more businesses to get engaged and to try to be a good partner in the future? And I know I'm just asking kind of a lot of questions and information, so I'm kind of talking out loud. And I did love, there was one slide in here, I think it was here. It was, oh, actually it's in the background material about the gender and the ethnicity in regards to some of these. But I would like to see the trends. I don't know where we were back in 2013 and to where we are now. Are these all the same businesses? Has there been an evolution? Has there been a change of what those look like? And where do we want to go? Are there gaps of different types of DBEs or small businesses that we really should be trying to seek out and really try to build support with? So I know that was a lot of information I just threw out there, Mayor. You gave me an opportunity, so I interjected. But I really do. I love this. I think this is really great, and I just hope that we're leveraging everything that we can to the best of our abilities, because I think that we should definitely try to incorporate as many of these DBEs and small businesses as we possibly can. And I don't want to just. I want to exceed our goals. I want to do more. I want to engage more. So whatever that looks like and whatever I can do to help that, I certainly do support that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I would also love to see those trends. And I hope in the future we can track more information, and MBA by background. So I think what you measure matters, and that what you're taking data on shows some of your priorities. Some of our fellow transit agencies have really been trying to support the startup ecosystem in their communities as well, and have done cool things with innovation. Will you talk about if a small business has an idea they want to bring to us? We do have one RFP coming up for some of our clean tech, but generally, how would they work with Valley Metro?
Councilmember or Mayor Gallego, a great question. One of the things that, and that's both a question and a challenge, because I'm not sure that we are confident that we are where we need to be and how they would work for Valley Metro. I can tell you that, for example, on our big projects, we make a concerted effort, but I'm going to be the first to say that we can always do better. One of the things we will be doing to make sure that that those businesses know how they can work with Valley Metro, and I think you heard Henry's excitement. Henry and I have had a couple of discussions over the last week, and coming from Atlanta, where I think they had probably a much more mature program than we have, I would say. I welcome the opportunity to have somebody who's been at one of those other transit agencies that I think you're referring to, Mayor, to bring the ideas of how they succeeded. And one thing that just literally, since these questions came up and answering your questions, we recognize that we have some gaps in our efforts and what we need to do. So I've asked Henry and Patty and Jim Hilliard to work together with Gary to really review what we have to be, so we can answer that very question that you raised. How would a small business really feel comfortable in coming to us and knowing that they could have every chance that, possible to participate or to learn how to participate? And based on your inquiry and the questions you asked, we're going to begin that, and hopefully we can work with you and your staff and moving forward to make that work even better.
Wonderful, thank you. I've learned that some transit agencies have developed an unsolicited proposal process so that you can come into them that way, or just an open pilot program as well. Some of our transit agencies have things like an Office of Innovation as well. And I think that is worthy of exploration as well for Valley Metro. If we want to be forward thinking, we have to have a way for great companies or ideas to come into us. Should the voters approve the extension of Prop 400, there's money set aside for innovation. Let's be ready to have the best, most innovative transit system and have staffing to be able to move forward with that. I'm gratefully appreciative of the work Gary is doing. 2 FTEs at Valley Metro. We're getting a lot of bang for those buck, but I don't know that 2 is enough. And especially if we look at DBE results in the past couple years, I think there's more out there that we might be able to do. So again, think that is something we should continue to look at. We want the cool small businesses to thrive here, and we want more success stories of small businesses that got contracts either directly with Valley Metro or with our primes as subcontractors that really were able to succeed in building our transit system. We want it to be built by more of the small businesses in our community. So I'd love to see us look at our goal, and maybe also have some sub goals, including some specific demographics such as our veterans. The memo that came forward originally, which was not put on an agenda, mentioned that we work with the Grand Canyon Minority Supplier Development Council. I was surprised to see that name.
Other places that we work with, and Patty, if you had and we're very active in the council that Patty talked about. We are a co-sponsor of the DB and Small Business Program, along with Phoenix Airport and ADOT. We are the 3 co-sponsors of that initiative. We work closely with both your aviation department and ADOT in trying not to duplicate efforts. And I don't know if that's where that contact came from, but I know through that joint effort between us and ADOT and Phoenix Aviation that we've come across a lot of organizations that we can work with.
I believe they changed their name 10 years ago, so just surprised to see it in the memo.
It might have been something, once again, I can't tell you exactly where that is. If they change their name, it's something we've worked on.
Wonderful. Well, I guess I think small business is a really important constituency here, and my message today is I hope we put more into our DBE program, but also generally in small, cool, innovative businesses that we do more in these areas.
Mayor, we appreciate that. We hear you. I think you can tell we are committed, and now we'll take steps and work with you and your staff, especially in implementing specific procedures and programs to try and accomplish that goal at a higher level. And we look forward to coming back to you and this board with a specific report. Give us a couple, 3 months where we can come up with some specific proposal how to increase or better or improve our program, and we'll come back to you with a specific report on that. We'll work with Councilmember Reddy to put that on an agenda early next year.
Wonderful. And will you put it on for action, unlike today?
Whatever action you would like to put on there, we will certainly reach out to you and find what action you'd like.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Anything else, Mayor? Do you have?
I'll let someone else if you have any questions, Chairman.
Yeah, no questions, but I echo Councilwoman Arando Savage. Information was very, something that I wasn't as familiar with, so it was great to see this information and echo your thoughts on how we can promote further minority outreach, small businesses and with a lot of based on some experience as in the city of Mesa that we had in kind of revamping our list of who we send out RFPs to or our list that we send out to for information, doing that constant outreach to additional institutions and businesses and associations is an important asset because sometimes folks are just not aware of being able to apply or being part of the process, right? So as much as we can do, and I'm assuming for future agenda item as far as I don't know if they would be appropriate to maybe put as part of the recommendations and something to vote on it, the maybe goals that we can set out to be more ambitious with that as one part of that piece. So I don't know if that's something that you were looking for, Mayor. But that makes sense to put maybe in writing, like we should be, maybe a number out there that we aspire to work towards to.
I think that would be wonderful. There's numbers we look at all the time, like on-time performance and others, and those are incredibly important, but so is our economic impact, and this is a way to grow it.
For sure. Anything else that you want to add?
I would love to look at that unsolicited proposals opportunity or some sort of innovation council where we can have cool ideas, which even our riders sometimes come up with. Wouldn't it be neat if we could make this change? And other transit agencies have methods to move forward. We have an innovation officer at the city of Phoenix, and that's been a wonderful way to just help us as a city. So having those formal structures, I think, could be really neat for our riders and our community. And I would also say I would welcome the opportunity to have our DBE things more highlighted on the Valley Metro website. it was a little bit hard for me to find them clicking through.
So Mayor, this is Patty. I do agree, and we are actually working on updating that where you don't have to click so far down to actually get to the website. So that is actually one of the things that we are already currently working on. So, but I appreciate your comment.
Okay, then I'm with you, and I'm with Henry on trying to do more directly with Valley Metro. We love what the aviation department is doing at the city of Phoenix, and happy to have partners in there. But I think even just going off some of the comments that Valley Metro board members made earlier today, we want that capacity for all and to really strengthen it.
Absolutely. And again, once again, it was a privilege and an opportunity for me to be able to speak about the DBE program and what our Valley Metro process is. Definitely hearing you. And I also hope that you hear us saying that we're committed and want to be good partners with you in this endeavor as well. It's very important.
It's nice if you guys are excited about this as well, because I think we can do good here.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Mayor, if I could just add, you don't have two better and more talented and excited executives than Patty and Henry to lead this. I'm confident they'll do a great job in advancing the cause.
Chair Heredia?
Go ahead.
Just really quick, I just want to reemphasize how much I do appreciate this coming forward. So again, thank you, Mayor Gallego, because like I said, I learned a lot, and I'm very excited to hear the enthusiasm from Patty and Henry and what they've been doing and wanting to grow it and making sure that they have the right resources to be able to make that happen, and but also to feel like they've got that flexibility to be creative and then to be flexible and see what that may create. I do want to just reiterate that I really love the idea of incorporating veteran-owned businesses. I hope that we can do that in the future. I think that would be a really easy collaboration, an easy way to find who those businesses are, because they may already be part of the program and we just don't know it. But I'd love to see that become part of the partnership moving forward. And I also mentioned, of course, Mayor Gallego said it much better than I did. As we look at our goals and what we want to attain, I love the idea of looking at those sub goals and really addressing those trends and trying to identify where we want to grow, where we can make some concerted efforts to make some changes if need be. So I'm excited to see this. I look forward to it coming back, and hopefully that we make sure that you have all the resources that you guys need, Patty and Henry, to continue to even make this more successful. So again, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor Gallego, for bringing this forward. I'm really grateful.
Perfect. Anything else, Mayor? And we'll work with your staff and yourself and Councilwoman Pastor on moving forward this on a future agenda to get more details and specifics on how we can strengthen this piece. And again, I think the innovation part, figuring that out, what can we do at Valley Metro on that end is an important aspect to this as well. So. Perfect. Well, with that, we'll move forward with agenda item 4, future agenda items. As we just discussed, we'll work on setting up an agenda item that has a request and recommendation on that with Phoenix staff and Mayor Gallego and Councilwoman Pastor for more details. So, and then Councilwoman.
Yeah, thanks, Frankie.
Yeah.
Yeah, just really quick. There's an agenda item here, and I didn't bring it up. It's actually the consent agenda of 2B, the non-revenue vehicle purchases. And it just made me think about something in the Audit and Finance Subcommittee that we talked about, and when we were discussing the future budgets and efficiencies, and I believe Mayor Gallego brought this up, is how are we talking and incorporating our fleet when it comes to introducing electric vehicles? So I think that's something that we need to have that discussion about, not only, within the bus fleet, but also within our day-to-day vehicles and what that looks like. I know that was really well received from Audit and Finance, and same with the board. But seeing this agenda item on here just made me think that we haven't seen anything in regards to how we are going to introduce or what our future may look like in regards to electric vehicles. So however we got forward, Chair,
Yeah,
I support it. Thank you.
that's that's a great suggestion. I think as cities, we're looking at you know various different options out there. We see at Mesa, I'll just toot our horn that we got our first electric fire truck ordered, and so I think we're going to be one of the first in the country. I think LA as well ordered one. So, and we're looking at options for our fleet, using electric vehicles on that end as well. And so as supplies get more abundant, I think the options will be there, and I think price will come down hopefully. But that's a great suggestion on how we looking at electric vehicle fleet. So.
To take it as credit, but I really can't. I got to give the credit to Mayor Gallego. Kate was the one that brought that forward through AFS, but this agenda item on our tonight made me just remember that we hadn't seen anything. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor Gallego. I'm not taking your credit.
All righty, we'll work on that item as well. Next item, next meeting, Thursday, November 18th. So this concludes the agenda items for today's VMR meeting. Appreciate this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.